Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings is one of the greatest pieces of cinema of all time, but why is it so damn good? Well, today we're going on a journey to answer that very question. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we'll be exploring the world that created Middle-earth. We'll meet the cast and crew, the very people who made these films, and take a peek behind the curtain to try and find out what created such lightning in a bottle. And there's no better place to start than Wellington, New Zealand, and the magical wonderland of WETA Workshop.
When the Fellowship of the Ring came out, I was just 8 years old, and it changed my world forever. Tolkien's work to this day still permeates every facet of my life. Our normal content on this channel is building massive diorama layouts of the locations from Middle-earth, and then playing massive wargaming battles recreating the stories of Tolkien and Peter's worlds. I'm reading the Hobbit graphic novel to my eldest daughter. Middle-earth forms a huge part of my career, and my whole family have just moved here to Aotearoa, New Zealand to live in Middle-earth. This world has clearly captivated my mind and my heart, and while I had read The Hobbit before seeing the films, it was Peter Jackson's trilogy that was the catalyst for an obsession that has shaped my very existence. Over the years since, through a career in the film industry myself and then finding a home here on YouTube, I often pondered this question: why am I so captivated by these films? There is surely a multitude of factors. Could it be the stunning landscapes of Aotearoa, New Zealand, the talented cast, the profoundly adapted screenplay, the incredible depth of the conceptual design, the detail and richness of the props and costumes, Howard Shore's phenomenal soundtrack? Or is there something deeper, some single aspect of cinema magic that elevated these films to a transcendent piece of art? One man's inspiring genius? Or maybe the spirit of an entire nation? Today we start to answer this question, and we're going to begin with the part of the filmmaking process that first captured my imagination, all the way back when I was 8 years old. The incredible world of Richard Taylor and Tanya Rogers' WETA Workshop. Back at the end of 2022, I was absolutely staggered to get invited by WETA to come and hang out with them for a couple of days. The amazing Jules German gave Bo and I a private tour of the entire workshop, and we met so many of the incredible folks who worked there, many of whom have worked at WETA since Lord of the Rings. It was an amazing time, literally meeting my childhood heroes who I have idolized since discovering the wonderful behind-the-scenes documentaries in the extended edition. And hearing their passion for Tolkien and the way in which their work came together began to shed light on our quest.
Overall, the design probably went on a bit of a journey initially while we were trying to find the essence of the world.
We didn't know what the stuff was going to look like, and so the first weeks, months on the project, we're trying to just nail down what is the aesthetic of this world, what are the rules, what looks right for Middle-earth and what's not Middle-earth, and we don't know yet. So we had to just find our way in.
A process of understanding where the world sat as a sort of historical ecology.
And the way we did that was Peter said a couple of briefs. He said, right, I want you guys to design one creature, let's say it's the cave troll, and I want you to design one army, which in this case will be the Urukai. Then later we moved on to the elves.
When Peter told us that we were going to be working on Lord of the Rings, you know, an immense number of emotions.
Let's just hit these single things really hard first.
Sort of like as a proof
down.
of concept of
Exactly.
workflow as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Once we've got those locked down, we can move on, and then slowly things opened up, and then at some point there was like, okay guys, draw whatever you want, which was my favorite day ever.
That'd be right, just go nuts, right? But that's such a clever starting point too, because getting the Uruks, that's quite there's such a unique aesthetic.
Occasionally you would do a single drawing and people would go, that's it, love it, that's great, follow that line. Other times we would put up, in the case of the Urukai, a couple of hundred drawings before we got anywhere near what Pete was actually wanting.
That was the inception point of it really for us. And in the next week we all came back to the workshop and, you know, excited, and as excited as Kiwis can project, which is, well, that's cool.
Yeah. So many of the questions in the beginning were what's not right.
Yes.
Like you're trying to define the the boundaries. One of what's not right for this. Where does the aesthetic of these films begin and end? How historical are they? How fantastical are they?
And it's very easy to go too high fantasy.
And then within that, what's the difference between an uruk and a regular orc? And are there different types of orcs, and how do they, all that
Where
kind
do
of
they come
stuff.
from?
So,
How old
what
are
are the
they?
materials
Yeah,
are that they
exactly.
work with? How refined are the materials that they work with?
What's their cultural significance?
Totally. How
Yeah.
old is the stuff they're wearing versus how young it is? All that kind of stuff. How uniform is it versus how random? We had to figure all that stuff out.
We wanted to make it look like you could look at a piece of architecture and tell if it was dwarven or elven immediately just by looking at it. If you looked at a weapon and then you looked at the architecture, you could tell which cultures were the same and which were different. So that meant establishing iconic designs. It's graphic design really at its basic level. So that kind of thought went into it, and into establishing very clear and identifiable graphic styles for all the different races that would carry through all their design influences.
It's really interesting just how much pitting is on the blade. I mean, obviously Rings was shot on 35mm, so it's kind of that
Yeah,
over
so
detailing.
That one's a bit more detailed, but of course this would have been found in a horde.
Yeah, right.
So the aging on Glamdring and Sting would be very different than something made by men.
yeah, I get constantly in use, whereas this is dug
That's
out.
an elvish blade that's ages old now.
The people that came back went into a flurry of drawing and sculpting, one more so than any other, which was Jamie Beswarwick. And so when we went back a week later for the catch-up that Peter had asked us to have, Jamie had created some extraordinary maquettes. And when we showed those to Pete, Pete just said, okay, well, that one, and that one, they're done.
Yeah.
Finished.
Wow.
Love them.
Do you remember any?
Yeah. They, the ones that he approved were the wraiths.
Yeah, wow. Geez, that's a tough concept too.
And Peter's very good at describing a visual image.
Yeah.
And Peter actually has, as Bad Taste can contest to in all the cameos, he actually will act out the essence of what he wants a character to be by pulling faces. I won't do it now. And he described it as having a lemon-sucking face.
Yeah, that's great imagery.
Jamie had absolutely nailed it.
So in the beginning we were doing hundreds of drawings and sculptures and that kind of stuff for a single thing to try and figure out what it was, what the aesthetic was. Once we had Peter's confidence, once we all understood the kind of rules of the world, it became easier. Until later on, we would, one drawing, yep, cool, done. That's, that's a sword in one drawing.
What is there any sort of one piece, weapon, creature, monster, land that is sort of like, that you're most proud of or most happy with from an artistic perspective on the film?
I was delighted with how Treebeard turned out.
I was fishing for the answer, let's face it.
I just love that character.
He's
I've always
amazing.
loved that character. And probably also because he's a little bit Muppety, and I've always been a big Jim Henson fan as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where the movies go, almost outside of the rules of their aesthetic. But again, you can do that with an end.
The very first maquette that Daniel did of Treebeard, we went through this elaborate design process on Treebeard to return exactly to that first drawing.
Wow, Lord of the Rings is such a unique piece of cinema compared to a lot of, and I think that a lot of the way that that's kind of come about is due to the incredible depth and the time. Like you guys were pre-production.
We were lucky.
That's unheard of as someone who's worked in film. Well, you guys started on the project in what, 96?
I don't think we started on Rings until 97, maybe late 97, but even then. But we still had years of pre-production because for a long time the film wasn't greenlit. So pre-production hadn't officially started.
Yeah.
But we'd already been on it for like 18 months to 2 years.
It was beholden on us to do a good job on Lord of the Rings because we had 3.5 years of pre-production.
Yeah.
That's almost never happened.
So we had time to learn and to ramp up and to get our feet underneath us because, as I say, we were all very, very green.
Yeah.
I think it would have been a very, very different project if we hadn't had that time. And it was maddening initially because we didn't know whether this was ever going to happen. This was like, well, you might be working on this, we're going to start doing it, but it might go away any time now.
It wasn't a luxurious working, but it was a luxurious amount of time. Like the costume department, they hit the ground running.
Yeah, right.
And
just like normal film.
Yeah, like normal film. But because we'd been in the development phase of the project, we arrived on the first day's shoot with large parts of our work entirely finished. It meant, for one, I could go on set. I could be part of the prosthetic makeup team. I could go away on location. It was incredibly exciting because
that would have been awesome.
Our manufacturing facility was just ticking along.
And so then when things were all go, we already had this backlog of work behind us and we were on our way. We had a trajectory because, as I say, we didn't know anything. I'd gone to art school, but I rubbishy little wee pencil sketches. I mean, nothing really. And then you've got these greats like Alan Lee and John Howe who come And everybody just lifts. When those people are in the room with you, you lift because
rise or fall, don't you?
That's right. The pressure's there, but also you learn so much from being in their presence. And they were so giving and so
they're just
generous
smashing
with their
out
time.
al frescoes in an afternoon. You're just like, whoa, okay then.
But they'd talk about it with you, right? And they'd talk about their processes, and we'd talk about the world.
But just by laying much more design into the development of every part of the film than we'd ever actually really see on film, but its presence would be felt in some sort of strange way.
We had Alan and John's beautiful illustrations to look at, but there's so much more of the world to flesh out than that. Alan was specifically, with his illustrations of the books, he would be tentative and he would be suggestive rather than definitive.
Yeah, I can remember I think it was his early sort of drawings of Treebeard maybe, where there's like little captures of pieces and never this full article, which I think was part of your job to kind of really take that and be like, show us the full Treebeard, please.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the difference between illustrating for a book, where you are hinting at things and then you're
working with the text.
And working with the reader. You're trying to spark their imagination to then dream that world for themselves. So Alan described it as being a little bit more I guess, sketchy in what he put down. Whereas for a film, you have to design it so that somebody can build it.
Initially, we had Alan Lee and John Howe working in our facility as well. Because they were here, we were able to utilise their immense knowledge of the world of Middle-earth and lift our young New Zealand designers to a level that was capable of accomplishing the massive task ahead.
John Howe turned up, and he brought an extraordinary knowledge to us through his reenactment of sword fighting and armour wearing.
And you'd go away thinking to yourself, I've got to get this right. And it was really stimulating, really, really stimulating. And many, many times he pushed Alan and I much, much farther than we would have normally gone on our own in a design process.
But even John initially wished to bring a historical accuracy to some of the armour components.
Function.
Which Peter didn't feel was right for Middle-earth because it was too in line with what we know from our own universe.
Part of Peter's brief was this gritty realism. There's no winking at the camera. There's Middle-earth is a real place. It's this alternate history. How important was it for you guys to embrace that, and how difficult was that part of the mandate, basically?
He told us right at the beginning, he said, if you're going to go and do your research, look at real history, look at films that are really grounded in history. He said, so, as much as we all love wonderful fantasy films that have been done before that, those weren't our touchstones for style. The style was things like Braveheart or historical epics. He said, start with that. We'll ground everybody in that reality, and then we'll add little wee bits of spice to the magic. Because Tolkien's world, there's magic in it, and there are wonders in it, but they don't overwhelm the story. They don't overwhelm the characters.
It's very much like the human element, right? That's driving the narrative and driving the connection to the audience.
You can't let the characters become swallowed by their costumes or their makeup or anything like that. You've got to keep them relatable, which I think was so clever. The way he charted that course for us all.
Richard Taylor's philosophy was always ground this in reality. Want gritty realism. We're making a historical film. We're not making a fantasy film. To that end, we looked at a lot of historical influences. While we didn't want to make it obvious, like you go, oh look, the elves are Greek or the dwarves are this or that. We wanted to create alternative cultures that look like they could come straight out of history, but you're never quite sure where they're from.
And when John Howe came on board, John's got such a fantastic knowledge of armour and weaponry, because we were all just, look, my
put a spike here, put a big curvy plate here.
My history was, and my training was playing Dungeons and Dragons at high school, and so we're all doing stuff that looks cool. It's totally impractical.
It doesn't function at all.
Totally. So John comes in and goes, and he was very, God bless him, he was wonderfully gentle with us. But he came in and went, this work, I think the way he described it is, he looked at our work and said, it feels very young, which is a nice way of saying, you guys know nothing. And then he gently guided us and said, right, let's learn about armour together. If you're going to design armour, you need to know how armour works. You need to have worn it, you need to have played with it.
He brought a whole bunch of his
He brought his own stuff, right? And then we had these, again, WETA Workshop imported these wonderful experts in it. Peter Lyon, this our swordsmith.
This is like the big hero sword that Peter obviously would have made.
So Peter made this 20 some odd years ago. This is the one that's on the movie posters everywhere else. Everything else is a copy of this.
May I hold?
Yeah.
Oh. So much steel. And the thing I really love about this blade is the balance point. This is like an insanely thick blade, but because of the pommel, it's just gorgeous. It just
all the hollow grinds, of course, reduce a lot of weight, so it's actually quite thin through the middle.
Yeah, right.
That nice.
Whoa, that is terrifying. So this is just like spring steel, presumably, for the blade.
Spring steel. So give a feel of that one. And then Faramir sword as well.
I'm not doing any further than that. I'm not game. We're working with Peter later today.
Excellent. We had Stu Johnson and Warren Green, who were armour makers.
We had a blacksmith on site, Stu Johnson at the time, who did the base armour for us. And then, you know, it was my job to sort of cover that and decorate it in leather and obviously reproduce it in urethane.
And the lovely thing was that our design department was only a few steps away from these professionals, so we could go down there,
of talent, isn't it?
And learn from them.
Yeah.
Initially, we had a group of designers. We had Ben Wootton, Daniel Falconer, Sasha Lees and Warren Mahi basically put out a few designs for us back when they used pen and paper for doing designs.
Well, what a time to be alive.
Absolutely. So, you know, not a computer in sight. They would give us the sketches, and they even made us some little maquettes for a 3D sort of look at things. And once those basic designs were approved, I was given the go-ahead to start developing sort of variations on that armour.
Before we put pencil to paper, you'd go and pick up books, actual real books, and look through them. We'd go and talk to these experts or pick up the actual stuff and move it around and understand how it works, so that when you're designing, then you're designing things that are real, that are believable.
We'd do 100 Rohan, 100 Urks, 100 elves.
And is that sort of across all of the different flavours of Rohan? You've got, or is like 100 riders?
That was 100 riders. And then
that's a lot of leather.
Absolutely, it's a lot of work. But having said that, we had different degrees of sort of hero quality.
Okay.
So there would be 30 that were top quality up front by the camera, all the bells and whistles, rolled edges and hand stitched. And then we'd go back to the midground, and then we'd go back to the background. This is actually a backgrounder. So he's just sewn on a sewing machine, and he's got no rolled edges, but you know, in the scheme of things, in the background, he looks just as good as the guys at the front.
Look at this gorgeous piece of steel, man. 20 years on and it's still absolutely awesome.
I gotta say, being a Lord of the Rings nerd, coming into this as a swordsmith, these are the swords, right?
Yeah, I know. There are no other swords.
This is what people are introduced to when they think of swords. And one of my jobs is to make sure that these artifacts are in good condition, following in Peter's footsteps.
Yeah.
Or hammer strikes or whatever you call it.
Yeah. Hammer blows.
Yeah. It's really cool to be able to share this with some people sometimes.
I'm getting that a lot. There's no desire for separation between the craft and the fans. Like you guys are, everyone here we talk to is just so willing and like, oh yes, please, I'd love to sort of take ownership of my work and share everything about it. And
it's so easy to design something. You can design anything nowadays. And with computer generated effects, you can make anything nowadays. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that when you put it on a character or you put it on screen that it's actually going to work. So having that foundation. And then once you know that stuff, you can choose places to depart from it. And we departed from it all the time.
Yep. But you've got to have that foundation.
It's a movie at the end of the day. So there's stuff in there that completely doesn't work. There's armor in there that's totally,
comes to, springs to mind. That thing
totally. This stuff is totally impractical, but has a cinematic presence to it.
Holy shit! Oh my goodness! This is massive. So is this like a prototype of Sauron's mace?
Yeah, so Peter would have made that, and then they wanted to increase the size of the head for it and stuff. But that's how big Sauron's hand actually is.
Wow. That is huge.
You need to know in order to be able to make those choices. Otherwise, you're just throwing stuff out there for, who knows what, but which is what we were doing in the beginning.
It's actually lighter than I thought it would be. Obviously, none of the scale is steel.
Yep, this is actual brass.
It's still a lot of brass, but it's really quite, how, in terms of thickness, is this like is it probably thinner than
it is thinner than and you, to be honest, you wouldn't make a suit of armor out of brass.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd definitely make it steel.
That's true.
But just for the look, we wanted something golden. And it really looks great on you.
What I realise is that I have a predisposition to like the prettier,
the good
more organic stuff.
Yeah, give me the beautiful flowing forms, please.
Yeah, I know, right? That's apparently so.
Daniel seemed to grasp everything that was good in Middle-earth. All the elves, the beautiful swords that the elves carry. He was able to design the richness of the cultures of these particular characters.
We had a great team, and everybody had their different strengths in there. Warren Mahi, a mate of mine, he joined us. I love his work, and he joined us. I think we'd had a head start on him by a few months.
Yep.
And then he came in midway through the Uruk process, is my memory. And he came in and he threw Tool on the radio that we were listening to, and we vibed with that. And Warren just had the aesthetic on the Uruks right away. And so he was. They were kind of linchpin people on each different.
And they almost like take a lead in that kind of.
And then
world.
we all like, oh, okay, and we swing in behind that lead. It's like you're in a band,
yeah.
and suddenly the guitarist does his thing, and everybody else is like, okay, cool. Now we pull in behind them, we support them while they do their bit, you know. Yeah. So Warren was lead guitarist on the Urukai, at least in my memory anyway.
That's great. Yeah.
So those were fun times. And as I said, the challenges, the nice thing about the challenges was they weren't frustrating challenges, they were exciting challenges.
Yeah.
And then once you get a few successes, you can start building on them.
We were using quite primitive stamps back then. We would have a sheet of wax and we would carve into it with a little tool. And then we'd pour some resin onto it, and that would make our rudimentary stamp.
And then you kind of just
smash it into the leather. Yep. Oh, wow. One of the main things we do here at WETA when we make leather armour is the aging process to make it look authentic and not straight off the shelf. Obviously, everything we make is brand new, but we don't want it to look brand new.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of different processes to sort of work into some aging.
We had no idea what we were doing, which is great because we had no idea. We didn't know enough to be terrified, right?
Yeah.
So we were just like, oh, this will be fun.
The exact same thing. It's sort of like he doesn't know if he would have leapt off the precipice if he hadn't known what it would have fully entailed.
And thank God for Richard too, because he did an amazing job of, I think, insulating us from the business pressures of that
so
kind of job.
Important in like a concept team and an art
He
world.
just let us dream.
Now it's finally time to badger poor Richard into talking about my absolute favourite work that WETA did for Lord of the Rings. Now I spent a mental amount of time putting this behemoth together and it was pure joy to edit, but in the days of TikTok, Snapchat and Shorts, there is no way this video is going to get supported by the almighty algorithm. So if you're enjoying this absolute monster, for goodness sake, just go and chuck me a buck on Patreon or click join right here on YouTube.
On Lord of the Rings, we coined the phrase big-atures because over half of the miniatures that we built at the WETA Workshop were the size of sound stages.
Obviously, you know, we build huge, large-scale dioramas. They're not so large as the scale that you guys are working with, but in the wargaming sort of space, they are. So let's have a chat about the big-atures. That's obviously a massive aspect of the work that you guys did on Rings, not so much on Hobbit, but you know, I think there was something like 72 shooting miniatures from Lord of the Rings.
God, you're good. Yeah, 72.
Yeah, is that obviously, you know, coming from a passionate model making background, that's something that you're really into. Was there any that I think you worked on, did you work on the Helm's Deep miniature?
No, I worked on all of them at some level.
Yeah.
But the Helm's Deep miniature, I did, anyway, I worked on bits and pieces of all of them ultimately.
Are there any that sort of stand out as the ones that that are like the biggest achievement for you, or that you really enjoyed the most? Or
I loved making the elven ship at the Grey Havens. I loved making all of them because in making all of them, I was hanging out with two of my favourite people, which was Mary McLaughlin and John Baster, who were, John was the head of our model making department, miniatures making department, and Mary McLaughlin was New Zealand's most experienced model maker. The greatest thing that happened for us in that miniatures department was Alan Lee arriving. And Alan Lee has this uncanny ability to do a series of sketches that on paper may look totally disconnected. They are obviously all aesthetically of the same architecture, but if you copy them, religiously copy them, exactly what he's drawn, it's as if you used origami to fold up his drawings and they all come together in the model making that you're actually...
It just works.
It works.
Yeah.
And as you start to pull each piece of the model together, as we did on dozens of miniatures, Minas Tirith being the most significant with respect to, because there isn't a plan drawn. It's not like you would normally draw up a set construction on a film. You're working literally off sketches. And because the budget was understandably tight, we'd do things like just go to the supermarket, get lots and lots of cardboard boxes, put those together and then foam them. Never thinking that we'd need to bring them out to put in museums years later, right? So we'd just chainsawed them up at the end and put them away, but of course they all had to be reconstituted at various times.
Yeah, I've poured over, obviously we're in the process of our massive Minas Tirith build at the moment, and I've been pouring over Alan's sketches for so long and looking at every little frame, and obviously the WETA collectibles are just such an intense resource for me, you know.
Yeah, that collectible that we did of Minas Tirith would be extremely accurate.
Yeah.
The Barad-dûr collectible that David Tremont built is as accurate as you can make a collectible, because he had the full-size model that he could caliper off.
Yeah,
we actually worked on the full-size model.
We were talking with Leonard this morning, and he was showing us his whole build process of the new Helm's Deep that's coming out in a couple of weeks, and you know, grabbing all of the measurements off the you know, quarter scale shooting miniature and taking that down to 10th scale. It's just an incredible journey.
I just mentioned one other miniature,
which
you might recall. I really loved the old mill from Hobbiton.
It's gorgeous.
When the orcs attack in the sequence.
The mill in Hobbiton, Richard really came up one day and with a photocopy of the sketch and said, right, it's about yay long and about yay wide, right? And I said, yeah, I guess so. Sure. And they went away, and a week later this incredible model had emerged, which looked exactly like the sketch.
That was beautiful. A lot of that was done by Mary and others. A guy called Bruce used to work for us, and he was fantastic. The Elven ship, John Baster is a great sailor, and we had done the Master and Commander ships together afterwards. We ended up doing the Master and Commander ships
Gorgeous
together.
Film.
But the Elven ship we made so we could actually sail it, with the idea, which we never got permission for as much as we tried. On the premiere of the film, we wanted to sail it across the harbour and into Wellington harbour.
Do you remember what scale it is?
Third scale.
Wow, that's a big boat.
So we built it with a well in the bottom of it so we could put an electric outboard motor through it. It had to be electric because we had to go sit under the decks.
Yeah, right.
It was probably only about twice as long as this table.
Yeah.
So we couldn't have any petrol fumes, and then I was going to do all the rigging through the deck, and then we wanted to sail in, but we couldn't get permission.
I have to make stuff like that's just how it is.
I'm getting that with all the staff here. Everyone's compelled to create. It's phenomenal.
And that's the thing, is like, I do swords now more regularly when those kinds of jobs come in, but another big part of my job is actually doing miniatures here.
Oh, nice. Well, that's a shame. That's not really relevant to us, unfortunately.
And what was really cool is working with a lot of the industry professionals that filmed the Lord of the Rings miniatures back in the day.
Yeah.
Alex Funky. One of the coolest guys I've ever worked with in my entire career. And any chance I get to, I try to work with him.
Yeah, he's a champion.
We even filmed on a lot of the same equipment.
Like the snorkel cam and stuff?
Yeah, so we had a motion control cam that burnt down in a fire several years ago. So it had to get rebuilt for this, so it was then named the Phoenix.
The Phoenix, I love it. That's incredible.
But yeah, great big giant motion control unit. We filmed out at Avalon Studios.
I've never done a picture with this many miniatures. I don't think anybody's done a picture with this many miniatures. Because one of the things that Peter chose to do was, where in many cases we would have done a matte painting, he's chosen to use a miniature instead. Or a miniature with a slight bit of matte painting to blend it into live action. So we're doing a huge number of shots where we're dropping a miniature behind the live action scene, which is wonderful because it means that we get the beauty of the live action, and then we're able to expand it and amplify it and create the environment into which this live action scene will play. And that's pretty neat.
I just love that world, and so to have the opportunity to be paid to just live in that world
and dream, and
for like 5 years.
Alan Lee, John Howe, like what an
my
experience.
Heroes, to sit in the room with them and learn from them. Yeah. And you know, the great thing was all those conversations that my friends and I had, you know, age 7 or 8, you know, on the playground at school.
Yeah. What would this look like? What would you?
Totally. And you know, it primes you for the career of sitting around having those exact same conversations as adults, well, young adults, you know, dreaming about, oh, what does this look like? What does an elven instrument look like? What does an elven weapon look like? How are they similar, whatever? How different are they to something that a dwarf would make or somebody from Gondor or whatever?
So we made 100 of those suits, which is the chest plates, the vambraces, the greaves, everything, the helmets, of course. And then once we had sort of got through the foot soldiers, we started working on the Royal Guards.
Makes the most sense, right? To sort of, you're going to lay that groundwork and then start to build the detail.
So we're sort of working our way up. Here's a sort of example of some of the Royal Guard. We don't have
we
a
all
full
know
suit.
I love the Royal Guard.
Yeah, but that's some Edoras dirt there, probably.
When Games Workshop got involved on Lord of the Rings and got the license, Tanya and I had the good pleasure of visiting Games Workshop twice. Got the full tour from various people there, John Gillard and the Perry twins and other people. Obviously, that was overwhelmingly amazing, and we went to their gaming studio and so on. They have a saying, or they shared a saying with me, if the fan can beat graduation and marriage, you've got them for life, right? But that suggests that you've got to become a fan young, and I didn't even know about wargaming at all when I was right up to probably my early 20s, I would say, because where I was growing up, there was farmers' sons in the district.
Totally, yes.
I was the only one model making, but I got into painting military figures in a big way and loved that, but never thought to actually play off with someone else in a wargaming environment. So sadly, I can't geek out on that with you today.
We are certainly pulling the curtain right back. What an incredible journey these talented folks went on to bring many of the physical elements of the world of Middle-earth to life. The gritty, realistic aesthetic that Peter imbued his films with all started right here with the conceptual design work done by WETA for the weapons and armor and creatures. But there's one area that we haven't touched on, which is not only one of the largest aspects of WETA's contribution to the films, but an incredibly important part of the realism created on screen through practical craft.
Now, the department that we oversaw at WETA that required the most extensive amount of work was the realisation of the creatures through prosthetics.
Everyone asks me what's the best production you ever worked on, and it's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
it always comes back to Lord of the Rings, because it was like, we didn't know what we were doing. A lot of us, like me, didn't know what we were doing, but we also didn't know how we were in the world stage. It was really weird. We were like, are you just going to look like a student film or something?
So almost like that kind of ignorance is bliss, right? You didn't know what you didn't know, so you were just diving in.
Yeah, and we had a lot of people from America and the UK who'd done the creatures and the prosthetics coming over to work with us. Gino Acevedo was one of the really big inspirations.
He's a talented dude.
He's still a mentor to so many people, including myself, but he's someone who's also so giving, and it was a big collaboration, not only at WETA, but also on set. It was quite amazing to be in some of those scenes, sitting there and seeing all those hundreds and hundreds of people in the costume.
Over the length of 3 films, we produced over 10,000 facial appliances, over 1,800 bodysuits and foam latex.
Of everything that you made for Rings, Lord of the, what was the sort of thing that the part that you're most proud of being involved with?
I think Gimli and Lurtz. So Gimli and Lurtz is
epic applications, right?
Well, I didn't apply them, but I got to make them.
We could pass through the mines of Moria. My cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome.
There is no actor involved in Lord of the Rings that sustained more difficult prosthetics time than John Rhys Davies.
A piece of foam here.
Here's what we prepared earlier.
Yeah. So this is foam latex, which is basically it's latex meringue.
Yeah.
So you get latex and you make it like all nice and soft and fluffy, and then you add an agent to it to make it set and then to make it cure.
Every couple of months we'd have a new container of foam latex arrive. It was purely brought into the workshop to make the thousands of hobbit feet, the suits of Uruk-hai and Orc undergarment bodies.
All the orcs, all the Uruk-hai from Lord of the Rings, they were made with foam latex. But Gimli and Lurtz, they wanted to have something different. They wanted to have what was all the rage in LA at the moment, which was silicone prosthetics.
Yeah, right.
But we had no idea how to do it. And my brother, me, and Gino kind of started creating the system. And that's something that I worked really, really hard on.
And what's the benefit of that sort of different type with the silicon aspect? Is it sort of more ability to act through the prosthetic, or just like ability to get different shapes?
It's to do with light. So, so if you look at us pale people.
Yes, well, I can do that.
There's a little bit of translucency. You can see my veins, you can see my freckles, you can see lots of different sort of colors. And even when you go behind a light, your finger's a little red.
Yep.
Its skin is translucent.
Right.
Even quite dark skin is translucent. But foam latex isn't.
Opaque.
It's opaque. And so the light just bounces off.
You have to build that up with the paint rather than the material. Interesting.
Yes, whereas silicon, it is translucent. And it's also, it kind of compresses, foam compresses, whereas silicon will displace a lot more like flesh.
Have that kind of...
Yeah. The issue with silicon is nothing sticks to it.
Yes.
So you can't stick it to someone else.
Yeah, made molds, I know that. But how do you blend to the face then? How does that application, but that makes it really challenging?
So what we have to do, it's called encapsulated silicon. So you trap it between a layer of skin that you can stick it to.
Today I'm painting a set of Gimli's prosthetics, and he's got this cowl piece that he's going to be wearing. That'll slip on over his head. They'll put that on first, and then the prosthetics will be put on. The forehead will go on. And then we've got the nose and cheek pieces.
We were using a latex skin, and then we were basically putting a flocking all over it, and then we would run the silicon over the top. And then that would basically, the silicon was held to the latex via flocking.
Yeah, wow.
And then you could stick the latex to the...
Essentially, it's like a physical textural bond.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it can't chemically bond, and then hope that it doesn't peel away and leave the skin.
Every now and then, so because it was quite new, and I was like, we were messing with it, and different layers of latex. It was all a bit, a bit random. Every now and then, Gino would call up saying, "Oh, yeah, a couple of layers too many. Maybe let's pull it off."
That's such a good Gino, just quietly.
One morning, he rings me up, and he's like, "Hey, Luke." I'm like, "Hey, man, it's not sticking." "Okay, just wanted you to know." I knew the morning he was having because I've been there as well, and it was just like, oh my god. But it was skin of our pants, but it was also the ingenuity stuff that we were like, well, we need to do it, so let's just do it. And it was a great way of collaborating across the whole production. But
amazing.
I'm pretty when I see those pictures of Gimli, and there's I think it was used as I think for one of the Oscar kind of nominations, is that you see that. And you go, there's nothing on there apart from his eyes that are real. Everything else is fake.
That's incredible.
And it's like, that's pretty cool. For an 18, 19-year-old kid, I'm like,
that's massive.
By no means am I owning any of it. I was literally being, hey, do this, and I did it, but I was proud of the work that I did there.
That still only counts as one!
Here, Lukey has begun to shed light on something that may be some of the hidden magic of WETA Workshop and their work on Lord of the Rings, and it's not really that hidden at all. The incredible passion of the people at WETA seems to be the lifeblood of the creative powerhouse that Richard and Tanya forged on the anvil of Lord of the Rings.
And thank goodness that a place like WETA Workshop exists, or something else similar, because...
Oh, yeah, I mean, what a place for you. What a perfect place to land.
Well, I don't know what I'd be able to do anything else. So no, I feel very, very fortunate that I was here at the right time, at the right place, because I arrived at WETA Workshop in 1996. This was before Lord of the Rings happened.
Yeah, so this is before the famous fish and chip meeting.
Yes.
Right, which was you were there for, weren't you? Yes.
Yeah.
What was that experience like, hearing that news for the first time?
That was pretty cool. So I grew up, similar to you talk about watching behind the scenes documentaries and all that kind of stuff, and that exciting, your imagination. I grew up watching those sort of things for, Star Wars. And the Dark Crystal and the Labyrinth and all this kind of stuff. So that was, and so I was watching those guys and listening to them talk and understanding that actually there's a career to be had imagining these worlds for the screen and sharing those images with other people. So that was always exciting to me. That I actually managed to find a place where I could do that for a career is beyond incredible. I still just pinch myself that I was able to find my way here. But then to have arrived here in 1996, ostensibly to work on King Kong. That got set aside. The studio had some concerns about it at the time, and so the timing on that got pushed back. And instead, they're like, "Well, we're just going to do Tolkien instead." And at first, it was,
no! What a tragedy!
I know, right? I'm like, I can't believe my luck. So I was fresh out of art school. I was spoiled because that was really my first proper experience working in this industry was on those films, which is pretty extraordinary. And so I've wanted to stay attached to them ever since. Like, I kind of don't want to move on.
Yeah.
Again,
this is your happy place.
It is my happy place. And so again, luckily, WETA Workshop has been somewhere that I can stay involved with it, and even beyond WETA as well.
How was your role? Obviously, that's where you've begun in that kind of concept space in '97. On rings. How over the last, and I don't like saying this, 20 odd years.
Crazy, right?
How has your journey at WETA changed?
Well, the lovely thing about this place is that the company is an expression of Richard's passion to make stuff.
Yeah.
And so the company.
I'm getting that vibe over the last couple of days. It's wild here.
It's basically his toolbox.
Yeah.
And we're all his tools, you know, and we're all on this journey with him. So the company as such is this organic thing that evolves and changes as the creative needs are, which it has to in a country like New Zealand because it's a small place. And so, you know, the projects that were coming in here demanded certain things, and the company would have to meld itself into a new shape to accommodate what was needed for that project. In the wake of the Lord of the Rings, obviously that had a huge effect on us. But Richard he goes after new creative challenges. He's somebody who's motivated by what would be fun to make next, and so different arms of the company sprout up in response to that. You know, hey, wouldn't it be cool to do a book? Okay, we've got a publishing arm now.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool to make collectibles?
It's like the way the physical place where we are right now. It's sort of
grows.
This sprawling little unwieldy collection.
You've been through a tour, right?
Yeah. Jules took us through the whole place yesterday into every room,
and it's
just
a labyrinth.
Where it is the labyrinth. Where does this place end? What are we going to discover next?
You come around the corner and there's another little person working in a little office over here, and there's something. Yeah, totally.
It's just like a bit of Shelob on the wall and a bit of it, and it's just all around the place.
Of course, because that's the thing. There's so much stuff gets made that then you've got to store it. So a lot of that is on the wall. So you walk around and there's just crazy stuff everywhere, right?
It's the perfect sort of kindling for that imagination fire, right?
Totally.
You're working in that space. It's all around you. So was this your favourite thing that you built on the whole films?
It probably is up there, yeah. You know, just because of the level of detail that I was able to go to with it. You know, it was quite an experience, especially for a young guy too. I was only 25 at the time.
Wow, what a gig!
Yeah,
and that was you came onto the project and worked with WETA. Sort of on rings, that was your start?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, that's when I came to WETA Workshop. The first things I really worked on was the Rohan soldiers.
Did you continue all the way through to Hobbit era?
Yes, yep. Worked on the Hobbit. Recently worked on the Lord of the Rings series also,
yeah, of course.
Doing some weaponry.
How was obviously returning to that world sort of periodically through your career in kind of almost like decades apart?
No, it's always great to sort of get back into something, and obviously the techniques and everything change in the meantime, so you've got a whole new process to sort of explore different elements and try and up your game every time.
Primarily still with leather in the new Rings of Power? And
yes, yep, that's my specialty.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, for sure.
Leather boy. He's a leather boy for days.
The trickiest design issue over all of the work we've done in Middle-earth was actually coming to terms with Peter's world design aspirations for The Hobbit.
Right.
Because if you look at The Hobbit, it actually is quite a bit different to Middle-earth, to Lord of the Rings. Yeah. We naturally went into The Hobbit thinking that we were going to transition exactly where we were in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings into Peter Jackson's The Hobbit. But of course that was wrong of us to do that, because Peter probably just didn't want to do an exact carbon copy, and he wanted to try and bring something new.
Yeah, a bit of a tonal change. And how that flows
so
into
that was the hardest part of
Yeah.
the whole process, was getting a grasp on that.
Yeah, not to mention, obviously, a very different pre-production experience on the two projects too.
No doubt.
How did your role with WETA change on The Hobbit?
So after Rings, I was in charge of a lot of mould making, and I started being a mould room supervisor for a few jobs. And then in 2005, I took a step back and started acting more. And so then I went out and did New Zealand film, and I also worked on films like Avatar.
Oh, wow.
And then in 2010, my wife and I had a kid, so I had to get a normal job back at WETA.
Back to the workshop. Normal.
Normal, I know. And so then back at WETA, working on Hobbit, I was predominantly looking after making the Hobbit feet. And the dwarf hands, and then the dwarf sort of faces, and so more silicone prosthetics and lots of other stuff.
And at that time, had you guys basically transitioned away from foam latex prosthetics, or was there still a blend of both techniques?
It depends on the job. Like if silicone is used for human stuff usually, but sometimes your creature needs to be silicon as well. And so lots of the orcs on Hobbit were actually silicon, but then some of them were foam, and it's kind of dependent on what they're doing as well. Silicon, basically, once it rips and it goes, it's really hard to patch. Whereas foam latex, you can kind of, I mean, on Lord of the Rings, the original was a lot easier. It's like someone's got a gash in their face, you just get blood, mud, or leather thonging, and that fixed it all. But with silicon,
just jam it in there.
Just jam it in there.
And roll camera, we're good to go.
Yeah.
It's 35mm film anyway, no one could see anything.
Oh, that noise. But then on the Hobbit, the silicon we were doing was a lot more robust. That 10 years between Rings and then Hobbit was, the silicons had progressed a lot more. And we were able to kind of, there was now systems that you could buy and things like that.
Things that were, instead of just designing everything from the ground up, like all of Lord of the Rings. Yeah, cool.
And the Hobbit, we were always on the back foot, so it was always playing keep up. And so there was one time where I was just running prosthetics at like 3 in the morning on a Saturday, because I had a daughter, so I wanted to see my daughter, so I'd come into work on a Saturday at like 7 o'clock and then run prosthetics all night, but it was fun, challenging but fun, and it was kind of cool to go back to Middle Earth.
Then I've got your face here.
Yes, so
this is, I guess, the third stage of your journey. First you make the faces and then you become them.
Yes, and for the Hobbit I actually got to do a lot of performance capture stuff, so I did motion capture a lot, the goblins, all through the caves. I was me and a few of my friends for months.
That's amazing. Building up like all the movement profiles.
Arm extensions and that, and so that was kind of, the Hobbit was the starting for me to be the crossover from behind the camera to more in front of the camera. Another decade later.
In front of the camera, very much so. Tell us about that experience.
We obviously did creatures and prosthetics and weapons for Rings of Power. I was at my desk actually at work.
Oh wow!
Doing some work and on Rings of Power, and they're like, so yeah, you've got the role, and I was like, what?
You've just earned your company a water ration.
It was a lead orc. Uruk.
Apologise.
I apologise, Adar. It was a lead Uruk playing Magrot, the general in the trenches in Rings of Power, who kills an elf and then has a good old tussle with Arondir, and
a big old punch up.
Yeah,
and it gets in there.
Yeah, and that was a really cool experience, especially for me to be on that side of camera, because I always remember on the original Rings back in 2000 going, I want to be doing what these guys are doing, and I was putting people in makeup every morning.
I want to be in the makeup.
I want to be in the chair. I want to be doing this so bad. And so, cut to 20 years later, a friend of mine, Andy Stalline, who's an amazing fight choreographer, stunt performer, but also I put in orc makeups. I don't know how many times. I'm in an orc makeup, and he's telling me how to do the stunts and how to, and it was just such a.
It's like the world comes full circle.
It came full circle, and I was just so much fun.
Before we go any further, I just want to give a massive shout out to all of the folks at WETA who have joined us on this journey so far. Richard Taylor, Daniel Falconer, Darren Gordine, Chris Menges, Luke Hawker, Leonard Ellis, and of course the incredible Jules German, who made all of this possible. And what a world we have discovered. Why is the Lord of the Rings so damn good? A question with many layers, and we've begun to chip away at one of them today. The gritty realism of the films, their truly grounded aesthetic, and the immersion within the world of Middle-earth rely so fundamentally on the incredible work done by WETA Workshop. The depth and detail in the props, weapons, the armor, the creatures, and prosthetics is utterly transportive for the audience, but the massive factor here isn't just the incredible skill of WETA's artisans, it's the fact they had the time. Time for extensive conceptual design, time for detail and craft, time to build a world, time to build a culture, time to build Middle-earth. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they had a luxurious working experience. They worked around the clock, just like the whole crew did, but the sheer amount of time before the cameras were even rolling is so incredibly uncommon in the film industry. I've worked in art departments on many film sets. Sometimes the pre-production for an art department is as little as a few weeks, and even big-budget productions comparable to the likes of Lord of the Rings, 3.5 years is utterly unheard of. In the majority of film production, every shortcut is taken. Everywhere you can, you cheat the audience. You suspend their disbelief just long enough to get the story told, especially in the modern landscape of cinema. But the mantra of the people making The Lord of the Rings was different. It was special and so rare. But perhaps the best way to understand the mindset of the folks at WETA is to hear it straight from the man himself.
If you couldn't rise to the highest level of enthusiasm, passion and professionalism and grasp this task as if it was the most important thing that you have ever taken on in your life, you weren't worthy of the task.
I think we're beginning to understand why these films are just so special, but there is a lot more of this journey to unfold.
Hey guys, Lockie from Zorpazorp here. Thank you so much for watching this far. Making this doco was pretty surreal for me, to be honest. Weaving together like a documentary narrative with interview footage from like my childhood idols was incredible, and I've really enjoyed putting it together. But I sort of understand if it doesn't really do that well, because a lot of my audience probably aren't going to be interested in it. It's quite different from my normal content, but you're here with me now, you're watching. Why? Let me know down in the comments what you think worked about this format, what was cool about it, why it engaged you. That would be really helpful, because I would love, my sort of dream for this series or this content is that it could be like a semi-regular thing. Maybe once or twice a year we have these doco special events exploring more of the Lord of the Rings filmmaking journey, because there's so much more we could do in future episodes. I live here now in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I have contacts in the film industry. There's a lot more we could do with this if it works. So thank you if you enjoyed it, and hopefully we can do this again, or maybe this will just be a one-off special documentary event. The almighty algorithm shall decide.
I have one story for you, because I heard you were
yes,
a Rohan
Yeah,
fan.
dude, I'm a Rohan boy.
Okay.
I was in Theoden's armor this morning. Yes. Tell me.
So the reason I thought about it is also because the 35mm. I remember back in the day before digital, they go, okay, and roll camera, and you'd hear that, especially when they were shooting like 50 frames a second, you would hear those frames going over, and there's so much money associated to that.
Yeah.
And so we were
the sound of money burning.
The sound of money burning.
Yeah.
You couldn't burn money as fast as this.
Yeah.
So we're in the Palinor fields out in I can't remember where, somewhere down
Twizel, back at Twizel.
somewhere.
Yeah.
And so we're shooting we're getting to do the charge, right before Aragorn says for Frodo, and he runs, and then the armies run. And so we had Kieran and another little
scale
double playing, and so they would run in front. And then they had this dolly, the longest dolly I'd ever seen on a camera. And the grips were just, they'd start running and they would just run. And so there's this massive long track all the way along. And then it was like 300 or 400 people in full armor charging and doing that, right? So we did one little take, and then we did a little part take, and they go, okay, we're going to do the thing, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so you hear Karen and the little one go, like that, and then it's like that. And as they're running, there's this Rohan right at the front of the camera, and he's running, he's got one of those round shields, he runs, and he goes, and tripped, right? And then his shield literally ran the whole length of the dolly,
just
blocking
rolling.
the shot. The whole army is completely blocked by this one shield, just doing this for like 10 meters.
With like the horse, like around.
Yeah, and the film's going and the dollies are running, and it was just like, cut.
Oh man, I want the footage of that. That'll be on the editing room floor somewhere, unfortunately.
So I think that was the most epic and the most funny thing I've ever had on.
The day a single Rohan shield cost the production hundreds in celluloid. In the meantime though, another huge thank you to the folks at WETA for their generosity, and a big thank you from me to you guys for watching. If you'd like to see the full uncut interviews with Richard, Daniel, or Luke, you can check those out on my Patreon link down below, or in the channel member section of Zorpazorp right here on YouTube. And I, of course, cannot end this monster without shouting out my wonderful Patreons and YouTube channel members. You guys mean the world to me and help me make the content that I love, especially today. If you'd like to support the channel, you can click the join button right here on YouTube, just down there next to subscribe, or you can join us on Patreon down in the description. There's lots of perks, and we've got some super exciting announcements coming up for the Patreon family soon, so check it out. Thanks guys, I'll see you again real soon.